So those of you that subscribe to the channel know that I do a lot with lanolin based undercoatings. So fluid film, surface shield, Woolwax, products like that for the bottom of your car to keep them from rusting. By far, the most common question that I get out of anything on this channel is, what do I do if my car has existing surface rust on it and I want to treat it with some sort of lanolin based undercoating? So that is what we're going to go over in this video. If I sent you this video link with zero context, that is why, because the answer that you are looking for is somewhere in this video. This video is going to be very long, and I apologize for it, but one thing I am going to do for you guys is down at the bottom, I'm going to put chapters. So if you slide the little bar at the bottom of the screen, it'll take you to different sections of the video where you may find the answer to the question that you have. So like I said, if I send you this link with zero context, that is why, because the answer is in here somewhere. So like I said, this video is going to be long and it's going to be all encompassing. So we're going to go over why these products work, what products you should use, what products you shouldn't use, how to spray these products, the equipment you need to spray the products, prep work you need to do to the bottom of the car. We're going to go over a bunch of stuff in this video. So with that, I'm going to bring you over to the bench. We're going to get started. Okay, so right off the bat, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at why rust occurs and how to prevent it. I do not care who makes the product. The way that you prevent rust is exactly the same way for every single product out on the market. So with that in mind, the way that rust actually occurs is there's oxygen in the air and moisture in the air, which also has oxygen in it. That interacts with bare metal and causes that bare metal to oxidize. Now there's other things out in the environment like salt, brine, things like that, that exaggerate the oxidation process, but fundamentally the way that you prevent metal from rusting is you create a barrier between the oxygen in the air and the bare metal. So as long as the oxygen cannot get to the metal will not rust, period. Now traditionally, the way people have stopped rust is with paint or rubberized undercoating. The reason those products fail is very, very simple. So if you put down a barrier of paint or rubberized undercoating, what ends up happening is one of two things. First of all, the product chips, okay? When it chips, moisture gets behind the coating. So that will allow moisture to get in behind the coating. It will then chip somewhere else, and somewhere else, and somewhere else, and suddenly the metal is gone behind the paint. That is why traditional undercoating fails. If the metal you're dealing with already has surface rust on it, there is going to be moisture in the pores of the metal. If there's moisture in the pores of the metal, you have now just sealed in the moisture with paint. So now you have an exaggerated oxidation process because now the metal can't dry out. Now in this situation, instead of laying down paint, if you were to put down lanolin or some sort of petroleum undercoating, it will displace this moisture and keep that metal from rusting. So it'll push that moisture that's in the metal to the outside of the coating, and the metal will not rust. The other nice thing about lanolin compared to traditional paint or rubberized undercoating is it will self-heal. So because the product stays liquid, it will not chip, crack, or flake like paint will. If it does chip from a rock chip, it will heal itself to some degree. Now, the next super common scenario that I get is people going, I want to take my bare metal or my previously rusted vehicle and I'm going to coat it with Pore 15, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take fluid film or surface shield or any sort of lanolin product and go over top of that. I'm not a big fan of doing this because when the Pore 15 fails, and it will fail at some point, it will crack and peel, it will take the fluid film with it. And at this point, It's the same thing I alluded to a second ago. You have a direct path for moisture to get to the metal. And at this point, it's gonna start peeling more and more and more and more. So, I'm not a big fan of using Pore 15 because guys, when it peels, it's not a small peel. Lanolin is not gonna self-heal a 3-inch peel of Pore 15. The final point that I want to make about paint and rubberized undercoating is how do you coat an internal surface? So if you were to take a truck frame and slice it down the center and look down the end of the frame, how do you coat the inside of the frame? Because like I told you guys just a second ago, you have to create a barrier between the metal and the oxygen in the air. So you can paint the outside of the frame all day long, but unless you paint the inside as well, it isn't going to do you one bit of good, because then it's just going to rust from the inside out. So how you guys plan on painting Pore 15, chassis saver, Rust-Oleum, rubberized undercoating, how you guys plan on putting that on the inside of your frame? I don't have the slightest idea. With any of these Lanolin products, there are adapters to get inside the frame, inside the doors, inside the rocker panels, things like that, so you can coat the internal surfaces and the external surfaces and keep everything from rusting. So the last thing I want to talk about here is going to be cosmoline. Personally, I'm not a big fan of cosmoline, simply because the overspray I cannot remove, and spraying in my shop, I really don't want, you know, my floors, my walls, my lift, my toolbox, all of my stuff coated in orange goo that I can't remove. That is why I prefer the Lanolin products in my environment. The other reason that I do not like cosmoline is not very forgiving. What I mean by that is this. So this is my representation of a rocker panel, and at the bottom of a rocker panel, typically there's some sort of pinch weld where two pieces of metal are spot welded together, and there's a very extremely small gap between those two panels. If you take cosmoline and you spray it inside a rocker panel like so, you have to be 100% certain that the cosmoline makes it through the pinch weld and out the bottom before it dries. The reason I say that is because if the cosmoline does not come out the bottom and it dries and creates a bridge like this, this pinch weld is going to rot out because there's no protection in there. If you try to spray another Lanolin product on top of this cosmoline, it is simply going to sit on top of cosmoline and not go through it and protect that pinch weld. So the only thing that I really recommend on internal cavities is going to be some sort of Lanolin or petroleum based product. Any product that dries should not be used on internal cavities for this reason. The last thing we got to talk about with cosmoline is putting cosmoline over top of rust. So if you guys have ever sprayed cosmoline, you know that it goes on extremely thin. And the reason that matters is when you spray it over a textured surface like this, like rust, what's going to happen is the cosmoline is going to end up down in the valleys of the rust, and you may still have peaks of metal that are still exposed to the air and to the oxygen, that these peaks will still rust. So what you have to do is you have to do multiple coats of cosmoline to ensure that you have complete coverage of the rust. So the film build that you get with cosmoline isn't nearly as thick as what you're going to get with Lanolin, but cosmoline is much more resistant to wash off than what Lanolin is. So like I said, guys, it's very unforgiving on internal surfaces and over top of rust. So the next thing I wanted to talk about real quick is going to be the products. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about products because you guys have seen me talk about products at length at this point. So much so that I have an entire playlist on my channel of me comparing different undercoatings to one another. I've tested over 30 different coatings in 2 separate videos. If you guys want to check those out, I'll put a card up in the corner, link in the description to those videos as well. The big takeaway that you guys need to get out of this is this. You have to think of each one of these products like motor oil. What I mean by that is this: you can run the quote unquote best motor oil there is out on the market. Some of them will last longer than others, but still at some point you're going to have to change your motor oil. If you don't, it's going to turn to sludge. I do not care what product or what motor oil you use, it will break down. These products are the exact same way. What I am saying is your diligence in maintaining the coating that you put on the vehicle is going to directly correlate with the results that you get. So yes, you can run the best product out on the market, but if you spray it once every 5 years and ignore it, your results are going to be garbage. Just like if you ran the best motor oil on the planet and changed your oil every 50,000 miles, your motor's probably not going to last that long. It's the exact same concept. Another super common question that I get is the black version versus the clear version. There's a bunch of people out there that like the black version. There's a bunch of people out there that like the clear version. The only difference between the two products is the black version of each one of these products has graphite powder in it. That's the only difference. That's what gives it that black color. So if you buy the clear version of Surface Shield, add graphite powder to the Surface Shield, mix it together, it will then turn black, just like the black version of Woolwax, just like the black version of fluid film. So I spray each one of these products out of a 5-gallon bucket. They're available in gallon sizes as well as aerosol cans if you guys don't have access to compressed air. Next thing we're going to take a look at is going to be the tools that you're going to need to actually spray these products. So to spray the 1 gallon, 5-gallon size, this is the gun I use. This is the Woolwax Professional Undercoating gun. I want to say it was around $90 for this gun. Came with 3 bottles, 2 extension hoses, and a fan tip. One of these extension hoses is like 360, so the end of this hose has like a fan edge on it, so it'll fan out 360. So you run it inside the frame, pull the trigger, and then pull it back, and it'll coat the inside of a frame, inside of the rocker panel. Whatever you get it, stuck inside, it'll coat the inside of it. As far as air requirements, so that kind of depends on the product that you're shooting. So if you're shooting Surface Shield's a little bit thinner than Woolwax, for example. So like Surface Shield, I tend to spray it between 40 and 60, whereas Woolwax, I may spray it between 70 and 90. It just depends on the thickness of the product. If the product is thin and the pressure is too high, you'll know, because what ends up happening is you end up with a lot of overspray, and it just it lingers in the air rather than just being sprayed onto the car at that point. So in that regard, you'll know when to reduce the air pressure. At the end of the day, if the air pressure is too high or too low, it's pretty obvious and you guys will know. As far as adjustments on the gun, really the only thing you can do is thread the tips in and out further. So if you thread the tip in further, it reduces the amount of product that comes out. If you extend it out, it increases the amount of product that comes out. So not really a whole lot to the gun. I've had this gun for, it'll be going on 5 years now. I bet you I've sprayed close to 55 gallons, a full 55-gallon drum worth of product through this gun. I have absolutely zero regrets with this thing for 90 bucks. Does exactly what it's supposed to do, and I haven't had any issues with it whatsoever. So for those of you that don't have compressed air, you're going to need to pick up aerosol cans. Now there are some stuff that go along with the aerosol cans. Obviously, it comes with the regular red straw, but there's also inner cavity adapters for the aerosol cans. So if you look, if you run that inside the frame, you can coat inside the frame, inside the rockers, just like you can with the regular undercoating gun. One thing I will say is, if you guys are going to spray Surface Shield, you need to buy one of these adapters to make it work with their cans. This is a graffiti adapter. It's simply, I don't have a Surface Shield can, I use them all, but it snaps on the top, and then the regular, it'll just sit on there just like that. So if you're using Surface Shield, you got to use that adapter to go from the can to the inner cavity adapter. Goes right on top of the can just like that. So that's only for Surface Shield. Those of you that are using Woolwax or fluid film, you won't need this adapter. Goes right on top, no problem. So this is the car that we are going to be coating in this video. This is a 2008 Honda Civic. It spent its entire life in Western Pennsylvania and Northeastern Ohio. I think it has like 135,000 miles on it, and it's pretty typical of what you're going to find in this climate of this year and of this vintage. So I'll take you guys around and show you. It's not perfect by any means. There is some definite rust that is formed on the bottom of this car, but it's definitely worth saving. You know, all the major structural components of the car are still in really good shape, and you want to keep those major structural components from basically rotting away. So next thing we're going to talk about is going to be prep and prep tools, what we have to do to the bottom of the car before we spray it to make sure that the product works the way it's supposed to. So this is all the stuff that I'm going to be using to prep the bottom of this Civic. Now this over here, guys, I'm probably not even going to use this, but what this is this is a surface, basically a surface prep tool. So it has a giant wire drum on it that spins. You hold it to the bottom of the car, and you know, basically the rust, and it'll strip it right down to bare metal in about 2 seconds. Unfortunately, as you guys can see, this thing is rather bulky, and you can't get it in a lot of different places that you need to go. This one's relatively cheap. I think it's like 85 bucks, but unfortunately the drums, the replacement drums, like this replacement wire wheel I have on this one, it's like 55 bucks just for the drum. So it's not a cheap solution, but if you guys are doing like pickup trucks, like the sides of a frame that you can see, sure, you could get something like this in there. Being that I'm working on this compact car, there aren't a lot of places that I can use this, so therefore I'm not going to. 90% of what you guys need is going to be just a freaking wire brush. It's not a whole lot of prep required, and all we're going to do is we're just going to loosen up any existing rust scale that's on the vehicle, and then we're going to spray over top of it. If you guys can't afford a wire brush, use a hammer. Just tap the loose surface rust, knock any loose rust scale off with the hammer, and then spray it. The hammer, if you guys don't have a hammer and can't afford a hammer, you can always use a screwdriver and just jab it, scrape it, do what you need to do. So if you guys can't afford a screwdriver, you got bigger problems than spraying some undercoat. So any loose rust that you guys have on the bottom of the vehicle needs to be removed. So let's say, for example, all of this rust on these gas tank straps, if I just spray over the top of this stuff and then this stuff just falls off, as you guys see, it's going to take the coating with it. So what you guys want to do, like I said, I'm using a wire brush just because it's going to be, my access isn't that good, and this is going to be the smallest tool that's going to make the biggest difference. So take your wire brush, your tool of choice, and you want to knock all that loose garbage off the top of whatever you're working with. So now at this point, that piece of metal is ready to coat. So you need to do this to the entire undercarriage. Any spot that has loose, flaky rust, you need to go through and remove it. So this is probably going to be the most time-consuming part of the entire process. So as you're doing this, you need to remember that the product that you are going to spray needs to be in contact with the good metal for it to work correctly. So if you have loose, bubbling paint, flaky rust, anything like that on the bottom of the car, that stuff needs to come off. The product needs to get in contact with the metal for it to work correctly. So that is all the loose rust, guys, that I got off the bottom of this car. Taking a look over here, you know, all the rust that's on the vehicle is well adhered to the metal. So the best tools to use on a compact car like this is just going to be a regular old flat blade screwdriver and a wire brush. Nothing exotic. If you have large flat surfaces like a truck frame or something like that, yeah, you could probably get into that surface finisher that I showed you, but a wire brush and a screwdriver will get you about 90% of the way of where you need to go. So this is what everything looks like. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to spray. So once you have all the loose rust scale removed, the next thing you need to do is go over to the rocker panels and try to remove, I wouldn't say every single one of these plugs, but like every second or third one. So get a pry tool or a screwdriver and just pop out the plug. And what that'll do is that'll give you access to put that inner cavity wand up inside that hole, and then you can coat the inside of that rocker panel. So go around, remove any body plugs that you can remove from the bottom of the car that you intend on spraying inside before you start spraying. Now, as far as spraying the product, the way that I do it is I start with the internal cavity sprayer. I start at the front, work my way to the back of the vehicle, and I go inside every hole that I can find with the internal cavity sprayer, spray all the internal cavities that I can. If it's a pickup truck, I make sure I hit, the tops of the bed sides and things like that above the wheel wells. And then once I have all of that done from the front to the back, I'll then put on the fan tip and start at the front again, work my way toward the back with the fan tip and just spray the whole chassis of the car. The easiest way to tell when you're using the fan tip where you got it as opposed to where it's still dry is where it's wet, it'll have a gloss to it, and where it's dry, it'll have like a matte or like a standard finish to it. So you want the whole surface of the bottom of the car to basically look glossy, and that'll tell you whether or not you have good coverage or not. As far as the quantity that is required, obviously it depends on the size of the car you're dealing with and how rusty it is. So the more rust that's on the bottom of the car, that is more texture for the product to actually grab onto. So typically the cars that are rustier, I actually use more product than the cars that are newer, because the cars that are newer don't have that texture and therefore they can't take as much product without it running and just falling off. So for this Civic, I use just over a quart. Typical like half-ton truck, I'll use 2 to 3 quarts. 3/4, 1-ton stuff, I'll use typically 3 to 4 quarts on something that size. So like a small car, small SUV, something like that, quart and a half, be plenty for what you need to do. So one area you want to pay particular attention to is going to be behind the rear wheels, just above them, these rear wheel wells. I don't care what kind of car you're driving or what kind of vehicle you're driving, it seems like this is the #1 area for exterior rust on a vehicle. So this little Honda down here on the bottom, yep, the paint's already starting to pop. So the way that you treat this area is what you're gonna do is one of two things. First of all, you either take out the tail light. If you're working on an SUV, typically you'll pull the tail light out. There'll be a hole behind the tail light that you can then stick that inner cavity wand and reach all the way up in here, spray inside this area, and then treat it from the inside. On a car like this, what you have to do is you have to take the interior out of the trunk, and once you have the interior out of the trunk, then you have access again to the panel inside this wheel well. So it doesn't matter if you're working on a car, SUV, or a truck, it seems like the rear wheel wells always rust out in some sort of area, whether it's up here in the front or up on the top or just behind. This area, for whatever reason, doesn't matter what kind of car you're driving, they love to rot out. So this is what everything looks like underneath. As you can see, like the fuel tank straps are thoroughly coated, and like I told you guys at the beginning of the video, any moisture that's on those fuel tank straps is going to get displaced by the lanolin itself. The lanolin will take the place of the moisture and then create a barrier to keep it from rusting. So what you guys may find if you do this to your own car is you may have to come back in a couple weeks, because what will happen is any spots where you did not remove any of the loose rust scale, what will happen is it'll loosen, the lanolin itself will loosen the rust scale, and it'll be super easy to then pop it off. So you may have to go back in a week or two and just kind of go over everything one more time, give it another scraping, give it another coating. But as long as you guys keep up with this coating, the rust on the vehicle will not get any worse. So like I told you guys earlier in the video, your diligence in applying this stuff and keeping up with it is directly related to how it will perform. So ultimately, it's your guys' call how well this stuff is gonna perform, because it's really up to how well you apply it. So as far as other like common questions that I get about these lanolin undercoats is GM wax frames. For those of you that aren't aware, GM on their full-size trucks use a wax coating on their frames rather than paint, and people wonder about the compatibility issues between the lanolin and the wax, whether it's going to make the wax fall off the frame or not. Here's my thought on it. Personally, I haven't had any major issues with it, but I will say this. Show me a GM wax frame that has spent 5 years up north somewhere in the Salt Belt that it isn't falling off on its own without any lanolin on it. So my thought is it's gonna fall off regardless, whether or not you put lanolin on it or not. The wax dries out, it falls off the frame rusts anyway. So to me, there's no downside to putting lanolin on it because it's gonna fall off anyway, guys. Do I mask anything off on the bottom of the car? No. I've had absolutely zero issues with any sort of rubber parts on the bottom of a car. The only place that I have seen any sort of rubber deterioration after 5 years was weather stripping. I've had no issues with bushings, nothing with brake hoses, nothing with like CV boots or ball joint boots, tie rod boots, nothing like that has swollen or degraded whatsoever. The only thing that I do not spray on the bottom of the car is gonna be the exhaust, simply because it's gonna burn off when it heats up and it's gonna smoke until it's completely burned off. Do I wash the bottom of the car? Absolutely not. What I do is I literally spray the bottom of the car and ignore it for an entire year until I come back and spray it again. I do nothing with it. I have people that I spray for that they go through car washes. I tell them just not to get the undercarriage wash, and they have literally zero problems. Their vehicles look just as good as mine do. I know some of you guys out there are probably going, well, you know, I want to get all that salt and everything off the bottom of my car. I don't want it sitting there all year. First of all, any salt that ends up on the bottom of your car doesn't contact the metal, therefore the metal cannot rust, because like we talked about earlier in the video, you have a coating between the metal and the salt. So the salt sits on top of the coating, never touches the metal, therefore the metal cannot rust. Next thing is, when you drive in the rain, that salt is gonna wash off. It'll wash right off the coating. So I typically spray my vehicles in the fall. So come January, when it's hit with salt, it goes through the entire summer driving through rain. By the time it gets to fall, there's nothing is on the bottom of the vehicle as far as salt is concerned, and that is when I spray it again. I've never had any issues. So those are the common questions that I get, guys. If you guys have any other questions, put them down below. Final thing is, guys, I will have links down in the description to all the products, to all the tools that I used in this video. As always, guys, if you guys like the video, hit like. You want to see more content, go down and hit subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.